Hi everyone, Tina Calder here from Excalibur Press. Thanks very much for tuning in to one of our very first BAM magazine special investigations. This one is entitled hashtag Pig Business NI. That's hashtag Pig Business NI. So you can follow the conversation online once we get started. This first one is really to discuss a business incentive scheme that has been dubbed the new RHI. Campaigners claim that it's going to have devastating environmental, social, financial implications across Northern Ireland. So I have written a piece. You can find it on bamni.co.uk. That's bamni.co.uk. But for all you podcasters who prefer to hear it, I'm going to just talk through. So really, it was a business incentive scheme that really is dubbed the new RHI by environmental campaigners, and it's set to make millions of pounds worth of payments to UK investors over the next 20 years. And those payments, which are made following the granting of a renewables obligation certificate, which is a ROC, to a facility, are 4 times higher in Northern Ireland than anywhere else in the UK. So that's pretty crazy as it is, but those payments, which can be claimed over the next 21 years, are for the installation and running of an anaerobic digestion plant, and that's a facility that converts slurry into methane gas, which creates energy, which is then fed back into the main electricity grid. In an FOI request by Friends of the Earth Northern Ireland, the Department of Infrastructure confirmed that there were 179 anaerobic digestion units passed for planning in Northern Ireland, with 69 currently in operation. It's estimated by campaigners, based on information freely available on the Gas and Electricity Regulator Ofgem's website, that each of these anaerobic digestion units will be entitled to around £900,000 per year in ROCs payments. That works out at an astounding £1.3 billion to be paid out on the 69 currently running over 2 decades. And those payments are funded in part by us, the householders across the UK, who pay about £200 per year on top of our household electricity bill. And that's to pay for schemes such as this. You know, it's not just for this, but it's to pay for schemes like this. So in order to run the plants, campaigners are adamant that there will be devastating effects on the surrounding communities, landscape, wildlife and local farming industry. Most anaerobic digesters in Northern Ireland use slurry and grass to produce the energy and highly toxic digestate. That's the solid matter left over from the fermenting process. So while poultry, manure and food waste can also be used to feed an anaerobic digestion unit, pig slurry is actually one of the preferred by investors due to the sheer volume that's created by the pigs. It just makes it far more profitable, to be blunt. So an increase in this large factory pig farms is also part of the government's Growing for Growth strategy. In 2012, the then Department of Agriculture and Department of Enterprise created the Agri-Food Strategy Board and appointed a number of independent business leaders to make recommendations in respect of the growth targets, strategic priorities and actions to be included in the plan. So following that consultation period, the Growing for Growth strategy was created to lay plans for the improvement of the local agri-food industry, and that's really important to remember, that this was supposed to be the improvement of our local food agri-food industry. So one of those recommendations was to increase the number of sows, female pigs, in Northern Ireland to 53,000 by 2020, which has resulted in a shocking rise in large-scale factory farming of pigs across the country. There was a documentary that came out recently by the campaign group Farms Not Factories in conjunction with Friends of the Earth. It's called Pig Business in Northern Ireland, and it reveals the brutal truth of how Northern Ireland's growing pig factory industry and subsequently the development of anaerobic digestion plants is having devastating consequences for communities across the country. I spoke to James Orr from who's the director of Friends of the Earth in Northern Ireland, and he says that we're not far off having our target of 53,000 sows. And he says once we hit that target, that would equate to 1.3 million pigs for slaughter each year, which is around 1.1 million tonnes of slurry being produced every year. Now, those numbers are quite phenomenal, said James, and that amount of slurry is actually the equivalent to 12 million people in a population of just 1.8. So in order to feed the anaerobic digestion plants, to qualify for the payments for the next 21 years, investors, of which a substantial number are based outside of Northern Ireland, are setting up these large-scale pig factories with thousands of animals in cramped conditions across the country. And those conditions really are terrible. Olga Harper from the Northwest Animal Protection Group speaks in the film, and she said that this new wave of intensive factory pig farming to feed these anaerobic digestion plants is a far cry from Northern Ireland's traditional farming culture and standards. She says these animals are kept in and reared in terrible conditions, from the sterile condition of the place, the concrete slather floors, the lack of the bedding, the lack of enrichment material, the semi-darkness in which they live. It's all just disgraceful. And she says the animals are condemned to live in the stench of the gases that are sort of coming up from the slurry pit underneath them. But the growing for growth strategy is she reckons it's bringing us all down to the lowest common denominator of agricultural produce that she says, and certainly I agree with, she wouldn't be prepared to eat, and certainly wouldn't be prepared to cook for her family either. So talking about it, the more and more I looked into it, and the more and more I tried to sort of tease out what was going on here, and when I got chatting to James further, he said that the environmental, social and financial impact of this factory pig farming, and subsequently the running of the anaerobic digestion units on people across the country, is going to make it a much bigger scandal than RHI. But we cannot get anyone to listen, and that's really, really important. I mean, I've submitted this across a number of platforms, and we're fingers crossed, we're hoping that it will go out. But it's got to the stage where the campaigners are literally banging their heads against brick wall. James said that the growth of these already profitable pig factory farms across the country is now being further bolstered by the massive financial incentives by these for the anaerobic digesters. And in many cases, he has been contacted by campaigners complaining of health concerns, the smell, traffic, noise pollution, land and wildlife pollution, and highlighting a number of very serious concerns in relation to plants not having things such as waste management licence, habitats assessment, bioaerosol emissions assessment, and pollution discharge. And it's not just that. There's a real concern around where this highly toxic digestate, that solid matter that's being left over in the fermenting process, is going, and how it's being spread on the land, because it replaces the original slurry. So with an increased need for hay and grass to feed the digesters, because you need a ton of that grass material, type material, to every ton that you have of the slurry, James said that we're finding that there's a lot of issues surrounding the intensive farming of land, and therefore the overspreading of the land, which is obviously having a damaging effect on the surrounding landscapes and wildlife, not to mention seeping into the rivers and streams. So I got through, sort of chatting to James and looking at the film and going through lots of documents, and oh goodness, you've no idea how much I've read. And I spoke to two campaigners that have been battling this in their neighbourhood for a long time. So campaigner Gwyneth McQuiston of Stop the Limavady Pig Factory she says it's just the tip of the iceberg, and I would tend to agree with her. She says there's much more to it. She says every time we dig deeper, we find more and more evidence to show that factory owners are unlawfully running plants and flouting planning regulations. She says that there's planning in for another 16 pig factories across the country, housing well over 25,000 more sows, which will produce another 750,000 piglets per year. And she believes it seems that the pig factories are only being set up to feed the anaerobic digestion plants, which she believes then is only being set up to line the pockets of the investors. She reckons it's not good for Northern Ireland, not good for the people, not good for the agricultural industry. And the Limavady factory was, up until recently, one of the biggest in the UK. And we have to ask, why is Northern Ireland being pillaged by these investors and these massive, factory farming, when in reality we had this wonderful reputation, for being a fantastic agricultural country with, some really good standards. Harriet Muir-Boyd from Stop the Newton Abbey Pig Factory says that, their voice is just being completely ignored. She's been campaigning for a number of years against an existing pig factory at Monkstown, which houses around 10,000 pigs per year. Her group's also fighting against planning permission, which was granted for a pig factory and 2 anaerobic digestion units at RHI, which is 17,000 pigs, just outside Newton Abbey at Calham Road. And that's currently... Calham Road is actually waiting planning decision at the moment. Harriet went on to sort of tell me that when it came to the planning application for the factory and the AD units at RHI, there were 250,000 people online who said they didn't want it to happen, and over 1,000 letters written by local residents, higher than objections to anything else in the Newton Abbey area. Just one person wrote in to say that they thought it was a good idea. But they were totally ignored. Her voice was totally ignored, she says, and she reckons it's just disgraceful. No one has stopped, as she said, to consider the devastation this is causing to local communities and people who live in the immediate area of the factory or the anaerobic digestion plant, or both. So it's, when you go to the film Pig Business in Northern Ireland by Farms Not Factories, former Environment Minister and Minister for Health Edwin Poots actually said, and I quote from the film, "Growing for growth will ensure that you have an efficient industry. We're in a global market, so we do have to be competitive. It will look to make farming more efficient, and as a consequence of that will lead to larger units and pig herds, larger dairy herds and so on, a greater concentration of animal on one farm." But James Orr from Friends of the Earth said that's exactly the problem. He reckons it's an anti-farming strategy, and he says it's taking us in the wrong direction for farming in Northern Ireland. He said we've made a name for ourselves across the globe in good quality farming, and he believes that the growing for growth strategy serves to destroy our reputation, landscapes, and could significantly affect human health throughout the country. There's so much more to this, much, much more. But this is the first in a series of features around intensive factory farming in Northern Ireland and the installation of anaerobic digestion facilities across the country. So please follow the conversation at #PigBusinessNI, and don't forget to use the hashtag if you share this podcast, etc. And of course you can follow the conversation on bamni.co.uk. And of course, if you have anything that you want to highlight in relation to this special investigation, or you have another special investigation you'd like us to look at, please email me, tina@excaliburpress.co.uk, and you can connect with me on Facebook /Tina Calder Journal, on Instagram, Tina Belfast, and on Twitter @Tina Calder. Thanks so much, everyone, and I look forward to hearing your comments.